Counterintuitive.
All righty. It's 5 o'clock, so I would like to thank all of you for attending this Council of the Whole Committee with the purpose of discussing rental inspection. And this is a work session where we will be discussing legislation and changes to legislation. So there will be no public comment section for this meeting. I'd like to start out by thanking the Community Improvement Committee, past and present, for the hard work they did on this. Initially, we had anticipated completing this process in a 6 to 7 month window, but then COVID happened. So you guys did a great job of keeping to schedule as best as you could, and of meeting all the outlined objectives that the committee had. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
With regard to tonight's meeting, it's going to be a little more structured, I guess, in that for the purpose of being able to better keep track of what we're voting on and everything, we're going to do the standard. If someone has an idea, they make a motion, it gets seconded, and I will have Kay call roll call votes on things, primarily just to be able to keep things straight. So ideally, I would like this to be the only meeting that we have to have, and that as a result of this meeting, changes will be forwarded to Mr. Marsh, and he will be able to put them in a form for us to review. Now, to do that, we can't spend too much time fixating on every single thing. So, I would ask that people try to keep things brief. If there's something that you want changed, point out where it is, what it is, how you think it needs to be changed. We'll have a motion, a second, we'll vote, and then we'll move on to the next item. There are some things, particularly when we get down to like item 4 on the agenda, that will be more time consuming. And so I guess the faster we move through the other things, the more time will be afforded when we get to item 4. Are there any questions of me before we start, or?
I wanted to spend 5 or 10 minutes
All right.
trying to get an explanation when you say every single thing. I'm kidding.
Yeah, okay, there's 10 seconds we won't get back. Okay. So that being said, the first thing on the agenda, because I figured there would be a number of things not pertaining to major issues that were brought forward by the Community Improvement Committee that individuals may want to discuss. So I'm not sure, should we just start at one end of the table and ask people to bring up those things individually, or would you rather that I just go through it section by section and say, does anyone have anything that pertains to this section?
The second.
Okay. All right. So that being said, remember, we're just dealing with items that don't have to do specifically with item 4 at the moment. So if we go to section 121.01 definitions, does anyone have anything that they need to deal with in the definition section?
Mr. President,
Yes.
the word under definitions, letter N, the word definition for family. Is this a legal, contemporary, acceptable definition according to our council? It does talk about marriage or adoption. That's the only 2 things mentioned, or more than 3 people in a family.
It's the same definition of family that's in the zoning code. I thought maybe you were getting at the Yoder case, but the Yoder case did not find our definition of family to be not legal or improper. So it's just consistent with the zoning code. Maybe when we get done, if we ever do reviewing the zoning code, maybe if we end up changing it there, maybe we ought to change it here, but we haven't got that far.
Okay.
So, but that's why it's that way.
Nothing about Yoder for me.
Okay, thank you. Anything else with regard to definitions?
Mr. President?
Yes.
So in the Community Improvement Committee's report from April, they made clear the recommendation that the scope of our ordinance include mobile homes. And so the way I read why to not include mobile homes, and so I wondered if that was intentional, if the committee, I did my very best to watch the committee meetings, but if that was intentional or not, that omission. Oh, yep.
Just a little closer.
Sorry.
So you think that the definition,
It references a dwelling unit, which is another defined term. Mike?
Well, first I should say, no, it's not our intention. Do not include mobile homes. And I don't think Y does not include mobile homes. I don't know what else to say about it at this moment. I think it meets the definition of, and, you know, I can't think of it. It meets the definition of dwelling unit. I'm not sure
Okay.
that anybody would have, that's the first I've actually heard that. But yes, it's always been our intention to include anything somebody is running as a residential unit.
Okay. So maybe I'll talk to you about that later, Mike.
Yeah.
That's nothing, if that, so I
Yeah.
just wanted clarification on that, so I'll talk to you about that later.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Rachel. Sure appreciate your going back to the recommendations, Rachel. And yes, we really did not work through the definitions in this fashion. We were more, talking more generally, but we did as a group agree that trailers, mobile home should certainly be included. And it's great to hear Mr. Marsh confirm tonight that that's the intention. So thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, anything else with regard to definitions? Okay. So, 121.03 maintenance responsibilities. Any language in there that's problematic? Okay. Anything from section 121.04 that won't be addressed in item 2? So anything
was
that's
that?
just sort of obscure.
I have 5 items. The first one is there a need to distinguish between interior and exterior inspections? In other words, the legislation in its current form does make a distinction. And if we have
Yes, because some types of properties are only required to submit external inspections if they are inspected by other governmental units.
in this
So,
legislation or in
Yes,
general?
in this
Mhm.
legislation.
So if we were to change that,
Then you're changing the whole thing. Yeah.
okay.
So
Okay,
if
so
you
it's,
want to rewrite it, yes. But yeah, right now we distinguish between 2 types of properties: those that are inspected by other governmental units and those that are not.
and if we, and perhaps this dovetails into it, the second item is distinction of multifamily dwellings, for example, common areas.
Mhm.
Is that fold into that at all? And
No, because we're requiring inspections of the dwelling units. So there are some occasions, my understanding at least, is there are some occasions where multifamily units have inspections of the common areas only. And that would not be something that complies with this ordinance. So in other words, that owner would still have to submit a self-inspection of the actual living units.
okay, so if there is a multifamily unit that has a common area,
Mhm.
what we've got here is for each rental unit
Yes.
to have. And if there's a common area, this legislation does not
Right.
address that, but other requirements do.
Sure. On multifamily buildings. That's why all the multifamily buildings, my understanding, get some sort of inspection. Some of them get the actual dwelling units, but all of them get the common areas by the fire department.
Okay, and that leads me to my third point, which is the extent to which the fire department's inspection covers the
Yeah.
items in the city's checklist. So if you have a multifamily,
I
Dwelling.
don't know what their checklist is, Bill.
okay,
Yeah.
and that's perfectly
Yeah.
fine. The point that I want to make is that we do have in the current legislation an exemption if there is another governmental unit doing an inspection.
Yes.
If we have the situation where there's a multifamily unit, the fire department does an inspection, it could very well be, and I don't have the answer to this, but it could very well be that the fire department inspects a subset of what our list is. They may not be interested in some of the other items. They're mostly interested in fire-related issues. So if we have in our legislation an exemption that says, hey, listen, if the fire department inspects the unit, then you don't have to have a self-certification. Then what we're doing is we're lopping off, because the fire department was in there, we're lopping off a subsection of the checklist that's no longer going to be filled out. And so that's kind of the crux of what I'm talking about with these first three items is that a loophole, for lack of a better term, where if somebody has a fire inspection, they then therefore do not need to have a self-inspection?
Well, I don't know what the fire department's checklist is, but those inspections are not fire inspections, they're safety inspections. They look at electrical, they do all that. I don't know if it would be the same as the checklist you're contemplating. I have no idea. But it is, in fact, a safety inspection. And when I wrote this, that's what I thought our idea was.
Okay, that's
So-
cool.
So, yeah.
we
But
may need to-
their inspection is not limited to fire issues.
So we may need to put something in there if we're going to keep the exemption for a governmental, being exempt if there's a governmental inspection, we may need to add something in that says, regardless, the checklist needs to be completed. It may be.
Maybe it would be simpler and easier to just ask the administration to work with the fire division on their checklist rather than to try and turn this into something that covers every possible scenario for 7,000 rental units.
Well,
I-
that's
I-
kind of our job, but yeah,
No, it's not. I don't think. I think it's their job.
Okay.
we're doing the legislation.
I
so-
understand.
I think when I'm doing the reading here, it seems a little confusing to me as a lay person,
Mhm.
where it starts with multifamily dwellings. It says multifamily dwellings are not required to submit an inspection of the interior rental units if said structures are annually inspected by a government agency such as the Bowling Green City Fire Department.
Mhm.
But in these multi-family dwellings, the fire department regularly just inspects the common areas.
No, not necessarily. That's what I was talking about. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes they actually inspect the dwelling units.
Well,
Mark,
could-
if they don't inspect the dwelling unit, this isn't an exemption for that particular property owner. See what I mean?
Right.
This whole thing is written for dwelling units, not for common areas.
Okay.
If they have common area inspections, that's nice, and I'm glad they do it, but it doesn't have anything to do with this ordinance.
All right.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
Mike, on that very note, before we get on to anything else, why do we have added then, multifamily dwellings are required to complete an annual fire inspection of common areas, hallways and lobbies? Why don't we just delete that? That's what's kind of
Well-
throwing me off about the common area too.
Because we want them to, when the fire department calls, Sandy, they don't have to allow it. So we're trying to create a situation where they will allow it. I don't know if they get into everybody's common areas.
Okay,
I can't tell
Okay,
you that that's
okay.
working out.
okay.
See what I
So they're
mean?
allowed into the common areas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I
And I'm sure
understand that a
they're
little
into
better now.
90% of them, but yeah.
So then the way this is worded, what it's saying is that even though common areas might be inspected annually, if the individual rental units aren't inspected annually, they still have to fall
an
under
inspection.
Yeah,
our,
then they still do the self-inspection and
Okay.
complete the form.
Mhm.
okay.
So then, Mike, that would result in every unit being inspected, would it
Mhm.
not?
That's the
Because-
idea.
Okay, but a moment ago, I thought you said we were trying to avoid that magnitude.
Oh,
Did I
no,
misunderstand that?
I'm trying to avoid language that says how and what we're going to inspect in each individual inspection in the ordinance itself. Trying to keep it general, authorize the administration to come up with a checklist, which they have done, that can be modified and tweaked as we do this and not have to come back and amend the ordinance every time somebody has a new idea or a change in the checklist, because it's all new. We don't know how some of it's going to work, and we don't want to have to be amending the ordinance. Took 2 years to get this far, you know. What if we had to do this every year? So
Um,
yeah, so that was what I meant when I was talking to Bill about let's just let the administration devise a way to enforce this, and we'll see how it goes.
So then if I'm understanding you correctly, and I believe it is, if the extent of the fire department's inspection is basically the common lobby,
That
Then-
doesn't comply with this. Yeah.
so then they will be expected, if there's 100 units, to
Yeah.
speak to the 100 units.
So when they do their
Okay.
checkouts of their tenants, they can complete our form and submit it, just like non-multifamily rental units would. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, that's great to hear. I was of the impression that those true multifamily things like the Edge, the things that
Mhm.
were built to be multifamily as opposed to conversions,
Mhm.
the administration was just looking at the lobbies. So what you're saying now
Mhm.
sounds terrific to me. But just to be clear on even multifamily, as it's used here, we are talking about like the Edge, not
Yeah,
house that's been
multifamily is
converted.
defined, John, further back, but yeah, that would be an example, I guess. The Edge, isn't that one of the complexes?
Mhm.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
the
that
one that's
would be
coming
an
to mind.
example.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with the,
yeah, huge
Names
brick
of them,
thing.
but
Mhm.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it was not our intention to not have them be inspected. It's just that we don't want property owners to have repeated or multiple inspections.
Of the same aspect.
Right,
Right.
right.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
And neither do you, I think. That's true to say. Yeah. Yeah.
So to summarize, currently it's worded multifamily dwellings are not required to submit an inspection of the interior rental units if said structures are annually inspected by a governmental agency such as the Bowling Green City Fire Department.
Mhm.
We do not have an answer, and that's not a big deal because we can find out as to the checklist that the fire department goes through. We have a
And we can
checklist.
even work with them on that since we're the ones that are going to be devising the checklist in the
Well,
end. We can
We,
work with
we
them.
have a checklist we're going to be talking about in section 3, and that checklist has things, for example, like checking a crawl space for mildew. And so if that's something that just doesn't seem to make sense necessarily for the fire department to do, then that's an example of the possibility that the checklist is not all checked by the fire
Could
department,
be,
and perhaps it shouldn't be.
could be.
So my point is that if we keep that sentence in there, we have the possibility that a rental unit is inspected by the fire department, but not thoroughly inspected like we have for our self-inspection checklist. And so that would mean that we have the possibility that some rental units will not be fully inspected, nor the self-inspection actually completed by the landlord if the fire department came out. So there is some possibility that something may slip through the cracks. And that's the motivation for bringing it up. Maybe it's something as simple as making a change saying that the portion of the checklist that the fire department checks does not have to be completed by the owner. That way we still have what we have, and we actually have the fire department in effect filling out part of the checklist. But I think there has to be something in here to take care of those situations. That's why we're having this meeting, is to cover this kind of stuff.
Well, does anyone have a recommendation?
Reword the sentence a little bit to make it clear, but include the meaning. Just reword the sentence.
Could be, yeah.
So like
Could be, or instruct the administration to have the fire department start using the new checklist once it's devised. Right? Could be that simple.
any suggestions?
I think for us to be thorough, it might be prudent to get a recommendation from the administration on this, because it may be that, and we don't have an answer to this, it may be that it's just some of the items just are inappropriate for the fire department to check, and it wouldn't be the best use of their time. Or it could be that they cover 80% of it and the extra 20% ain't no great shakes. But the point is that it would be beneficial to make that determination after getting more information. What we can say here and possibly agree on is that we need to take one of at least two tacts on closing this up. And one is to say that the checklist should be completed either by the governmental unit, and that those sections that aren't completed by the governmental unit are completed as part of the self checklist by the owner. That's option A. Option B, as Mike said, is find out from the administration. Maybe it's something the fire department can do in its entirety. I don't feel that it would be the best course of action to make a decision between those two without more information from the administration. But we did bring it up. What we're here for.
All right. Does anyone have a specific, apart from Bill, a specific idea on how to handle this?
Does the administration have anything to say tonight? I don't want to put you on the hot seat. But
I think that we understand the point that Bill's trying to make, and we can take a look at the fire department checklist, and we can provide to you some recommended language amending the sentence to, I think, address Bill's question.
Okay.
But I don't think it would be responsible for us to do that right now.
Right.
Give us a chance to look at those two items, and we can forward that to you.
All right. Anything else from 121.04?
It said there's discussion of the Community Improvement Committee's recommendation in our meetings to have the annual self-inspections. First of all, at some point, maybe not now, but at some point, the discussion as to whether it's annual. And the need for clarification when we get to the procedure, and I have to check to see where that is. That's 105. Well, so I guess I'll hold off. I apologize for that. Yeah, I'm okay with the rest of it.
Does anyone else have any language issues with 121.04?
Mr. President,
Yes.
so 0.042A, the second sentence requires that the form, the inspection checklist, be signed by the owner or a designee and by an occupant if the unit is occupied at the time of inspection.
Mhm.
I move to add a sentence following that sentence, something that says, occupant shall only attest to receipt of the checklist and not to the condition of the property.
Okay.
I think that was the committee's intent as they discussed this before. But I would hate, it seems to read as if the tenant, I just don't want the tenant to be attesting to anything about the condition of the property, only that they received the checklist, which I think was our intent.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So I move to add a sentence after the second sentence, which ends, and signed by the owner or designee and by an occupant if the unit is occupied at the time of inspection. I move to add a sentence that says occupant shall only attest to receipt of the checklist and not to the condition of the property.
I second.
Okay. Is there any confusion on the issue?
Oh, I can add some.
No, I wasn't seeking any.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misread. There is some possibility of discussion as to whether one or more of the tenants or all of the tenants. I know we had discussed this in the committee, and there's advantages and disadvantages either way. So that's one item with respect to this. And another one is, would it make sense to not only have a test to receipt of the checklist, but discussion of, or is that maybe not needed?
I don't think that we need to make that express here. I think that
Okay.
the property owner can probably make those decisions. That's my feeling.
Okay, so the question is, do we want at least one of the tenants or all of the tenants, or what's the, should at least have a little bit of discussion about that.
Okay, I'm happy either way.
All right.
What did the committee?
No, the committee, you know,
with?
when it looked at things like tenants receiving checklists, it was really mostly in advance of renting, you know, so that they're making the most informed choice. This is a different aspect of after, but you know, after an improvement. But all along, we felt that, you know, there could be 4 or 5 people in a given place, 3 people. That if one person signed it, that was at least the representative of that group. So I think to expect if there's 5 people for them all to sign it seems, you know, burdensome.
Mhm.
And logistically, it can be
Yes,
challenging.
yeah, it's hard to get them all together at one time to sign anything. I realize that.
Okay. All right. So as it's worded now, it's what, at least one?
Well, it just says occupant shall just say at least one occupant with that.
My motion was in the singular, so occupant shall only attest to receipt. I mean, it's a defined term. I was trying to look really quickly
Okay.
if that's, but I think occupant singular will get it done.
Mhm.
Okay.
Or we
So,
could split the difference and put the little parenthesis S after it.
Kay, could you call the roll?
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
Yes.
Hollenbach,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Roland,
Yes,
Zanfordino.
Yes.
Okay. So we've added a sentence. Anything else from 121.04?
So, Mr. President, we, you know, that we are now speaking of this generally, or we're fully parsing 12104?
I was just at this portion looking for outlying items,
Okay.
nothing pertaining to, you know, anything detailed. If you want, we can move, since we're coming back to 121.04, we could just leave it for now. And then when we get to item number 2, I think it is on the agenda, we could just dive into it fully.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. So I
so-
certainly have more things to say about it, but
All right, so let's move on then to 121.05. Are there any small, minor changes that someone noticed that ought to be made there? Go ahead.
Mr. President. Oh, go ahead, Bill. Were you about to jump in, Bill?
Oh, no,
no.
go, please.
Well, you know, I've expressed many times that I'm concerned with how self-certification heavy this is. As it reads, it basically is exclusively self-certification. And, you know, we'll be discussing tonight whether we'll be adding some third-party true oversight. But in 121.05A, in 21.05A number 1, it says that it states 3 criteria where a property would be eligible for self-inspection, self-certification. And the first one of those conditions is it speaks to after the last conducted inspection. As a layman, that makes no sense to me. So with something that's getting out of the gates initially, there's nothing previous to refer back to. So by definition, every single apartment in Bowling Green passes item number 1. I mean, regardless of their condition.
Every property is within self-certification to begin with. This section deals with, can you continue to be in self-certification? You're right, the ordinance is self-certification heavy because that's how it starts. Everybody in 04 A1 with that timetable, everybody gets to submit self-certification the first time.
I see. So that's why number one
That's right.
really reads as
Yep.
almost
So
irrelevant.
that's in the
because
future then.
I see.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Okay, is there any other general items regarding 121.05?
I just want to have opportunity to see if there's any council members that, upon reading this, feel that it is sufficiently clear that everyone starts off with self-certification. If it's clear in the context of this, where we don't have to make a statement in and of itself, that initially everyone's in the self-certification category. I didn't see anything specifically addressing that. It may be that, I looked at it too late at night.
You have to go back to 04 Bill and
Okay.
04-2. Inspections shall be conducted by the owner, manager, designated agent, or be contracted for with a City of Bowling Green approved inspector. That's where it starts. Then the next section that you're talking about now deals with how do you continue?
Okay.
Okay.
So that sentence itself, by inspection shall be conducted, that's saying, that's where we're
I don't
starting.
know how else
That's
to
the
say
level
it.
set.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yep.
cool.
Okay, any other items for 121.05? Okay,
So Mark, Mr. President, just to be clear, we're going through these, but there are things that I think we need to consider in both of these sections, but we are circling back to these for the greater philosophical questions.
right.
Okay, great.
Like if you look at the agenda, after this, we're going to talk about 121.04.
I see now, yes.
One in more detail. Then we're going to discuss the checklist, and then we're going to get into 0.05, 0.06, 0.07 with regard to inspections and that mechanism. So,
Okay, thank you.
so really what I guess I'm trying to do right now is there something that doesn't pertain to those sections with regard to the mechanism? And it's just a language issue or something like that.
Okay, great.
So,
Thank you.
all right. So is there anything in 121.06 that is problematic? Is there anything in 121.07?
Mr. President,
Yes.
Mr. President.
Just-
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't hear you, Bill.
item 8, dwellings subject to inspections by another governmental agency. I know, John, we had talked in the Community Improvement Committee meeting about the meaning of that. And I know when I was submitting to the full council, when we were talking about registration, to have it sync up with these exemptions, there was a concern about what that meant. So is there any concern that you have about what that means by another governmental agency?
No, I'm sorry. I'm not remembering the confusion in the past, specifically about this, but these 8 categories make sense to me.
Okay, so since it is talking about the dwellings are exempt, and it lists some of them, which, I mean, we're all going to agree on, like nursing homes and group homes, dwellings subject to inspections by another governmental agency. I know there was some thought that, again, circling back to what we started off the meeting, if the fire department inspects a dwelling unit, the fire department's another governmental agency. And so what that means in this exemption portion is that a dwelling that is inspected by the fire department is exempt from the certification. Now, maybe something all we have to do is just say when the administration goes to give us a recommendation on what we talked about earlier, maybe they can fold that in as well, so that we don't fall into the possibility that someone's exempt because the fire department inspected. So that's a long circuitous route to say when the administration reviews the fire department discussion that we had, to include 12107B8 as well.
Would this be more clear if we switch dwellings to dwelling units? The dwelling is a building versus the individual unit within the building?
I like that suggestion. Make it specific to the apartment.
It seems like the definition.
Yeah, it still would, we'd still need administration to look into it, but it's good to have a single unit consistently throughout the legislation, and we are talking about rental units, so I think that's a great idea.
I support a little more detail on that so that we make it clear.
Yeah.
I phrased it as a question. I was asking if that would add the clarity that they're
Mhm.
looking for.
All right, so do you want to make a motion? Change that to dwelling unit?
I move that we change 12107B8 to read dwelling units.
Second?
Okay,
Harold.
Yes.
Hollenbach.
yes.
Phipps.
Yes.
Robinette.
Yes.
Roland.
Yes.
Zanfordino.
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else in 121.07 that needs clarification?
I'm back up to the third-party inspections. I just have a comment to make. It's not a criticism of anything that has been drafted in this, but something new legally that has to do with inspectors, who could be the third-party inspection people. There is a new law in the state of Ohio that became effective July 1st that requires inspectors of houses that are being inspected that are sold, or any, it's not just if a house is sold, if someone wants to hire someone to inspect their house while they're living in it, just to make sure it's safe, inspectors must now be licensed by the state of Ohio. And I do have a list of those that are licensed. There are 7 in Wood County. And I will give you a copy of I will give the administration a copy of this, because sooner or later, I think you have to make up a list of inspectors that are acceptable by the city, and this list might come in handy.
Okay, anything else in 121.07? I do have an issue with number 2. Numbers 2, and this just causes me confusion. It says for 2-family dwellings. Okay, so that we're talking strictly duplexes, right? For 2-family dwellings, if the owner occupies one of the dwellings. Is there a reason why I can see exempting the unit that is occupied by the owner because that's their home and we're not asking people to have their homes inspected. But I'm just wondering if someone from the Community Improvement Committee could clarify for me why we decided to exempt those. Okay. Okay.
We did not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
I don't know
the
that there's
thought
one.
just that since they live there, they're going to maintain it
That's the
better?
only reason I did it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't think it came up at the
It did not.
committee
No.
meetings. I'm pretty sure
Okay.
it didn't. Yeah, honestly, I just thought if somebody's living there, then hopefully it's not a problem. But
Okay.
you could change, if you wanted to, you could change that and say for 2 dwelling units, if the owner occupies one of the dwellings, then only the other unit is subject to this ordinance or something.
Okay.
You know, if you decide that's something you want to do, it'd be easy enough to do.
Okay.
Do we have to vote on that?
Well, I mean, I'm fine with letting it drop if no one else
Yeah,
has a problem with it.
I'm actually comfortable with the exemption because the reasoning I have is that if you're living in the one unit, you're going to be like on site for the other unit. It's not to say that the other unit could be in terrible shape. I think we're dealing with probabilities. I have personal experience. The first house we ever bought was a duplex, and we lived in the front, rented the back, and it was a situation where definitely knew what was going on and kept it up. So I think to get at the motivation for this legislation.
So long story short, you're okay with it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone want to change it? Okay.
No, I think that
Yeah, I have a
works for
question.
me.
How are we determining whether the owner is occupying the dwelling? That's self-reported? How are we going to determine whether it is an owner-occupied dwelling?
It's a public record.
So based on the information on the auditor's site?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There have been some questions about the accuracy of that.
I don't know that there's accuracy problems with respect to owners. I think what we have run into with the auditor's site is that sometimes the improvements that are listed on the second page of the card, we have found to not always be accurate. Like it might say 3 bedrooms and really there's 2 or really there's 4. But I haven't run into a problem where the ownership wasn't accurate. And part of the reason for the inaccuracy sometimes of what's exactly there is because until building inspection came along, which wasn't until the 1970s, the improvements that are at these sites carried forward for years and years and years from whatever the auditor had on them for tax purposes in 1930 and 1940. And so, yeah, so something, but that's when Sandy works with these, when you say, I've never run into a situation where the owner wasn't accurate with the auditor stuff.
Yeah. I just had one, but you didn't close it. It would have been a real good example. Chicago
Where
closed it.
Where they had the owner was wrong of record.
They had Chicago Title as the owner, and actually the resident who lived there was the owner.
No.
But that owner wanted to intentionally not have it in his name, and he put it in the name of Chicago Title. That wouldn't have a bearing on this.
No.
I thought that perhaps this issue of finding out if the owner resided in the residence would be settled in the permit. Is there anything in the permit where we ask if the owner is residing on this property?
Well, and remember, they're still going to have to register the rental side because
Yeah.
we're registering everybody.
Yeah.
So if there comes a time and we're not out looking for this situation, but if there ever is a complaint about that duplex, now we investigate and we determine who owns it, who lives there, that kind of thing. But yeah, they're going to be in our database for the registration of the rental unit. So we're going to know about the building even if we don't have an inspection.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I think another simple way to handle this would just be to add a definition of owner occupant. So we're not relying on the auditor's website. If we decide to go that route, if you remember the
Well,
community
we
act,
define owner.
we do, and we define occupant.
occupant.
And so we would
Yeah.
just, I'm just looking at the Amherst ordinance, which was suggested to us by our community action plan, and they define owner occupant as one or more natural persons who own a whole or undivided interest in fee simple of certain real property, and at least one of whom occupies a dwelling unit thereon as his or her principal residence. So if we could, I mean, I think the important part of that definition is the principal residence
Right.
piece. So it seems pretty straightforward to me to add just another definition if that's where what we are inclined to do.
That would fix it for me. I was thinking about changing the wording of number 2, but if you just want to add a definition of owner occupant, I think that would address it too. So
And so I'll make that motion and
I'll second it.
okay.
So we have a motion and a second to add a definition of what an owner occupant is. Okay,
Hollenbaugh,
yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Roland,
Yes.
Zanfordino,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold.
Yes.
All right. Is there anything else from 121.07? Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. The non-exclusively, section 121.07 is basically, it says following dwellings are exempt from the requirements of this chapter. Included in this chapter is our registration. So once we pass this, the exemptions that we had in the registration would be added to, and I think it's mostly overlap, by these. So then what that means as an implication is that if someone does have a duplex and they live in one part of it, they are not required to register the other one. I'm okay with that, but that's what ends up happening when we pass this the way it's currently worded.
Okay. Are there any other concerns over 121.07?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm not okay with an owner occupant not registering the other half of their dwelling if they're living in half of it. I would like to change that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. You know, Bill, you're putting into words things I've been kind of chewing on. I think this makes more work for the city. I mean, there'll be X amount of places that they won't get a registration on because it's part B of a duplex. So, and I don't think this is a terrific number of places, but I think that it adds confusion, and then all of a sudden there's people that are renting that are not registering. So, based on the input of you two gentlemen, I'd like to make a motion that we not exempt two-family dwellings if the owner occupies one of the dwellings. Again, for the reasons I've stated, it's going to just create a nightmare for.
But the permits are exempting them, and we are now registering. I mean, the registration application exempts them. So we now have to go back and change that. Am I
We're
right?
registering all the units.
Oh, even if we're not inspecting, we're registering them?
Everything's that's a rental.
Never
unit
mind.
is
That's
being
not a
registered.
problem then. No, yeah, never mind.
John brings up a good point about it confusing things in a sense, but this whole piece of legislation is a balancing act between the various stakeholders, and where it may be, I guess, possibly more administrative cost by not having as many registrations. Thinking in terms of the intent of the legislation, as well as you got somebody that's living in the front part of a duplex. Do you want to subject them to that complication? There's arguments both ways. With Jeff, I certainly understand that we don't necessarily need to be wedded to the pool of registrants being exactly the same as those that are self-inspection. we may want to just with registration know who's out there, who's renting. For me, though, I'm trying to, as we all are, we're trying to balance the workload, et cetera. And for me, it's not the intent to include the duplexes.
Let me try here a new number 2 here and see what you think and see if this answers number 2 and not the literal sense. For 2-family dwellings, if the owner occupies one of the dwellings, then the personal residence unit of the owner is exempt. Does that satisfy?
That works.
I figured it was exempt anyway because that's where they live. We're not going after residential
Right, but
properties.
maybe it wouldn't hurt to put that language
But if
in
you
there.
delete the exemption, which is what John's motion was, then they aren't exempt. Okay, so
Unless you reword it as you
Right.
say.
I
does that satisfy both?
Yeah, if you're willing to change your motion to change the number 2 exemption to something along the lines of what Mike just said.
I certainly am. It gets at the same thing, and I
Okay.
think Mike's wording is superior.
Okay, so then the motion that we'll be voting on is to change the language so it specifies that the owner occupied unit is exempt from inspection.
Right.
Okay. So is everyone cool with that?
Mhm.
And registration,
What's that?
but both registration and inspection. It's
For
a
the
private
owner.
residence.
It's exempt
Right.
from the whole chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
everything on there includes the registration. The whole
Okay.
chapter.
And so the duplex part of it, the part that is being rented will be subject to both registration and self-inspection.
Yes.
Right.
So then I'm wondering if we strike 2 altogether, doesn't that get us there as well?
I don't know.
Anything? Yeah.
I kind of like the language change just because it puts in the ordinance that in case there's any confusion, that since the owner is occupying one of the 2 units, that it does not get inspected. I just feel it's more clear that way than to just drop it altogether. That's where my brain functions.
And Mike added the word from whole chapter.
Well,
So-
it's already in there, but yeah.
Yeah.
So with the wording that Mike had, and I didn't write it down, so did anybody write it down? I'm sorry, I was so intent to listen to your every word, I didn't write it down. I can't multitask.
What I said was to add after the word dwellings, then the personal residence unit of the owner is exempt.
And you said from the whole chapter.
Yeah, well, it already says that in the
Okay.
beginning
Okay.
of B.
Okay, well, let's vote on that.
First, it hasn't had a second. And
Second.
okay, there we go. And we work so well together. So what that then does is it has both registration and inspection for the non-owner occupied unit of the duplex. And Jeff's point earlier was addressing the registration. So for me, it would be a very important distinction to say that the exemption is for the exemption is for the self-inspection, but not to be in keeping with what Jeff wanted, not the registration. In other words, the wording would be such that you register the unit, but you don't have to inspect it.
Which does. It says that only the owner unit is exempt from the chapter. The chapter, when you guys are done with this and you amend 121, is going to include inspections. So the rental unit, registration.
No, you're right in that it says this addresses registration and
Yeah.
the inspection.
Yeah,
But if we exempt this, I'm concerned about the inspection of the non-owner occupied
it'll
unit.
be exempt. Oh, the non-occupied
Yeah.
will not be exempt.
That's my point.
Yeah,
You'd like it to be
Right.
exempt?
I would.
and
yeah.
Jeff,
Yeah.
Okay, well then
Exactly.
vote
Jeff
no on
wanted it
this.
to be registered.
Right.
And so that's what I was trying to get at.
Right. And I get that. But
Okay.
again, the distinction is I want the non-owner occupied duplex unit to not be subject to.
Oh,
the
so you
inspection.
want it exempt? Okay.
I want it
All right.
exempt, as opposed to the current
Okay.
measure that's
I
been
got you.
seconded, and we're in the discussion phase of that,
Okay.
is it will then not exempt for registration or inspection. And that's a bridge too far for me. So, okay, I've
Okay.
said my piece.
All right. So, okay.
Phipps,
We're voting to change the language to clarify that the unit that the owner lives in does not have to be inspected, but the other unit does.
Mhm. For Mike's language.
Right.
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Roland,
Yes.
Zanfordino,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
No,
Hollenbach.
Yes.
I think it's important for me to note that I am not storming out of the meeting in protest of the vote. I have to leave for a moment.
Okay. All right. So while Bill's gone, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay.
You just need a second.
I love that.
Okay. Is there anything else in 121.07 that is sort of out there? Okay. 121.08 enforcement. Is there anything with the language or the fees or anything in that is problematic? Okay. All right. So then that allows us to check off item 1. 1 item, 1 hour. So we'll be out of here about midnight. Okay.
Mr. President,
Yep.
actually, I think that this, I'm sorry. Oh, I think that this probably fits best in one. I would propose adding a new section, perhaps before enforcement, so a new .08, and titling it something to the effect tenant education in the common area or permit posted. I realize or recognize that the ordinance currently does not talk in terms of permitting, right? But that was also a unanimous recommendation of the committee report in April, and I've been kind of losing track of this in this ordinance. So that aside, I mean, the gist of what I am proposing is that we require a permit or something,
Or registration?
similar registration, sure, in the common area that has important phone numbers and is evidence that property owner is participating in our city registration program. And then secondly, that we require any new tenant to receive a city sponsored, city drafted tenant information form. If you remember, I can make copies. I'm sorry I didn't before, but Amherst has such a tenant information sheet. It's 2 pages. It talks in terms of tenants' obligations and rights. So obligations to nuisance, noise, garbage, that kind of stuff. And then also is helpful in getting them connected with relevant numbers when they run into issues. So I did not know that you were going to ask for specific language this evening, but I can either, if you would like specific language, I can come up with something in line with, where did my Amherst, right here. So it would be something to the effect, so a new number, I move to renumber and add a new 121.08, which has 2 parts. 1, a rental permit or registration shall be conspicuously posted and maintained within the premises in a common area or area as is necessary to be visible to tenants and inspectors. And then part 2, tenant information. The property owner shall be required to distribute to tenants annually and to each new tenant an information sheet provided by the city describing key local regulations, laws, including those pertaining to noise, alcohol, and nuisance houses, as well as state laws and codes applying to rental properties.
Second.
I too did a lot of studying of Amherst.
Well,
Rachel, could you repeat the first part?
Sure. So while you were gone,
Yes.
I mentioned that a question mark for me in this process is whether or not we are going to actually issue a permit. The Rossford ordinance doesn't talk in terms of permitting, but it was a unanimous decision of your committee to issue a permit. So that being what it is, we could either call it a permit or we could call it a registration, whatever. That language is still need to be worked out. But first part of my proposed new 121.08 would be a rental permit or registration shall be conspicuously posted and maintained within the premises in a common area or area as is necessary to be visible to tenants and inspectors.
To reply to that, one of the items that I was concerned about is when we were first given the charge by our esteemed president, it was rental, registration, inspection, and licensing, although I think we had a different order for that. And we have concentrated on the registration and the inspection and pretty much been silent on the licensing. So whether you call it a permit or it's a license, the point is that if someone doesn't follow through with this, is it the intent of this council to say, you didn't follow this, there's fines, but are we wanting to say you follow these requirements and we issue you a license so that you can then rent your unit? And so that might fold in with what you're saying in terms of a permit. I would like Mike Marsh to speak to, do we have, just to be clear, do we have a right then to have a license or permit such that if they follow the rules, we as a city then issue it so that they can rent, and if they don't have the permit or license, they are prohibited from renting their property?
I don't know the answer to that. The only cases I've seen strike these kind of things down, but not for that specific reason. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody can give you a definitive answer. The reason it's not in this ordinance, though, just to remind everyone, because it's been going on for a long time, is because all of you got well, it might have predated you two, but all of you got a message from the mayor that he would not support such a thing in this ordinance. And so that's why when I wrote it, I didn't include it.
It's certainly motivation.
Yeah. So I don't want to speak for the mayor, but he was not in favor of licensing or permitting, but he was in favor of inspections.
Okay.
As long as we could do that legally, being aware that so far in our state, mandatory inspections have been struck down and criminal provisions related to inspections have been struck down. So that's why there's an emphasis, at least initially, on self-inspection. And that's why there's an emphasis in what I would call the penalty provision or current section 08 of civil penalties. Because we were trying to do this in conformance with the decisional law that's out there, not from our own district court, which hasn't ruled on this issue as far as I know, but two neighboring courts have.
Mr. President,
yes.
I don't remember that part. I mean, I don't remember Mayor Osbacher speaking to the reason for to not license or issue a permit. So if you could speak to that more, I don't understand. It seems like just
Well, I think that goes back to discussion that's taken place over a great number of years. And advice that we have got, legal advice that we have received from counsel and others. I just have felt, and has been my interpretation, that is crossing into an area that puts the city at legal jeopardy. And I didn't think that it was necessary to include that and create that jeopardy after having said that I'm supporting inspections. You know what I mean? I just felt like, if you'll remember, some of the guiding principles that I talked about when we first did this was, number one, acknowledging that there's a segment of our housing stock that requires attention, and acknowledging the problems that exist, in that sector of housing. And also, one of the guiding principles was not exposing the city to legal challenges or legal jeopardy. And I think it's what Mike is referring to is going back to that principle. In terms of, the discussion about the checklist, the thing that I wonder about initially is how are we going to force that? If that is part of the ordinance, I have every reason to believe that owners would comply. They would put it up. How are we going to enforce that? Tenant comes in and doesn't want that prominently displayed in the entrance or of their house, and they take it down. How are we going to hold the owner accountable for that? I think that's problematic, and I'm not sure it's necessary. In terms of the checklist or the resource list that you referred to, I think that we've developed that list. Mm-hmm. We've shared that with the rental agents, the property owners, and I think a good number of them, if not most of them, are currently distributing that to their tenants. Mm-hmm. So I'm not convinced necessarily that really needs to be codified in the ordinance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I will just have to do some legal research. The permitting, that's just nothing I'd heard before. So that's just interesting, but I'll look into that a little bit. As far as my motion that's still pending, I don't think that the word permit is make or break there. We could say registration, and that's still getting us to the same place, which is, the committee talked a ton about
everything.
That and the need for open communication, transparency, mm-hmm. all of that stuff. And I really think that this is just we are talking about a self-inspection scheme. So the most education we can do for our tenants, many college age, I think the better. Mm-hmm. And the mayor, I do appreciate the mayor's point. There's already a great city document out there that talks in terms of tenants' responsibilities and rights, and that could be what this section of the ordinance references or is used to comply with this section.
Mr. President, throughout all of the hearings, I kept talking about the need for educating the students too, what being a responsible tenant is, and also what's safe and what isn't safe, because these young students are taking off on their own for the first time, and they are not thinking about living off campus for the first time with a lot of excitement because they'll have a furnace or because they'll have water. They're thinking of, we can do this and we can do that. So I think it's very, very important to have a tenant information sheet on the property given to them by the owner of the property. And there has been a great one done by Massachusetts the state of Massachusetts actually did it, Consumer Affairs. What I thought all along people were talking about with the inspection was that the self-inspection should be in some fashion given to the tenants and should be posted so the tenants would know what the self-inspection said. Let's just say that the self-inspection said that the plumbing was working thoroughly, no leaks, no moisture in the P-traps and must have proper caulking, toilets must be secured, etc. A student doesn't know what proper plumbing is. These things spell it out. So let's give it to the students so they know what's expected of the tenants and they know what's safe and what isn't safe because they have a checklist to look at.
Well, that is not part of my motion, but that is already part of the statute. We're not, so your what you were suggesting is that we require that be posted.
Yeah, or we know it needs to be on the property. And you know, I'm please forgive my language. I'm not buying the fact that a student's going to be worried that this is posted on the back of a door. I don't think they care. I really don't think they care.
Well, keep in mind that the form as it exists right now is 4 pages long. So if it's going to be displayed, you're talking a poster size item now.
Or printing that's small.
Mr. President, so in
back.
in response to Mayor Osbacher, who's now rolling his eyes, when you're in a hotel, Mayor Osbacher, there's a plexiglass and then there's the license behind it. That's what I think the Amherst statute is envisioning. If we're not in fact permitting, perhaps the city comes up with a registration that has important numbers on it that's approximately the size of a hotel license, put it in the back of plexiglass. I mean, I think that's what Amherst is doing.
And you know that could be, but you know that there are at least 5, if not 10 agencies out there doing what you're talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that information's not out there, but nobody's doing this. And so to launder this up with stuff that everybody else is doing, including us already, the city already has what you're talking about out there and probably in the hands of every one of these people that's here. We take them door to door every August all around the city.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I understand we want students to be informed, but you know what? They got to inform themselves too. The municipal court does it. Student Legal Services does it. They have a housing fair every year on the campus and they do it.
Yeah.
We're talking here about something that's not done anywhere. And I think that it's probably better to keep this what it was intended to be. This was not intended to be a substitute for the Landlord-Tenant Act. We have a statute that deals with that already. Things aren't happening out in town to make property look bad because people didn't get a flyer. But things might be happening because we don't inspect them. And I think that's what the mayor's been trying to say. But to try and turn this into something that's carrying a lot of other baggage is probably not going to be helpful and will probably have us end up in court. And the idea of this was to keep it simple, keep it legal, try and comply with the 2 court decisions that are out there and limit it to that. And these folks know, because I've heard the mayor tell them that by God, if you don't comply with this, we'll come back with something in a year or 2 that you won't like. And I think they know that's true. Am I right? Yeah. You know, this gives them a chance. This gives them a chance to comply.
So I would only say, sorry, Mike, real quick. This is a self-inspection scheme.
Yeah.
So it's truly, I mean, we're relying on complaints from tenants.
Yeah.
And so making.
Well, no, we're not. No, we're not. That's not what this is. We're relying on landlords or owners of property, to be honest. This has nothing to do with complaints from tenants. We already deal with that. This and the Landlord-Tenant Act deals with that. This is relying on the honesty of property owners, not complaints from tenants.
Well, the complaints from tenants, Mike, would be a check on the honesty of property owners.
Might be, but we'll rely on our own reviews.
So we're just I am just proposing to make sure that our tenants are getting the necessary information they need to serve as a check on our self-reporting system. I mean, I appreciate your perspective, but my motion still is on the table.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. President, I'd like to, first of all, stand to your point, 30 been raised, that the document, the inspection document is already going to require to be handed to the tenant. It's already there. I would support an additional requirement of handing them a registration document. That doesn't bother me. And we already do part 2 of your motion. We already provide the information and have been for years. And that document, I believe, is even being updated by Mr. Fawcett. So that's already happening and has been. It is not a new requirement or a new idea, just restating something that exists. So I don't think there's any, I don't support the motion because, again, I would support handing permit to them, going beyond giving it to them, I think.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
This is a good conversation because it's touching on some of the motivation for the Community Improvement Committee's work. And one of the tenets of it was education. And if we ever get to the part where we're looking at the checklist, the bottom part of the first page does have some information about who to contact and websites, et cetera. I think that, and this is something that would go to the tenant, so they would have it, as Greg mentioned. And as far as the educational component, maybe we work to come up with a more complete list or a more refined list of these are the key points that we want to make sure the renters have, and we'll have it be part of this registration, or I'm sorry, the certification document, so that they have it in front of them if they need it. And yeah, it won't be posted unless the renter wants to post it. But my point is that it was legitimately a topic and a goal of the committee to increase the communication, because that is, if you read through the 4 or 5 page recommendation, we did address that, and it was very important to do so.
Mr. President,
Yep.
I would just point out, Bill, that the checklist is very much, I mean, this will just be, the administration will perhaps take this under advisement, but the administration will be free to come up with their, I mean, necessarily so, their own checklist. So if we want to, mandate this piece of it, I think it's appropriate to do it in ordinance.
Yeah, that's one way to approach it.
Mr. President?
Yep.
I'd first point out that not all renters are students. I think we need to be careful to not put everybody in that basket. If there are 6 entities already doing this, then that seems like a great opportunity to streamline the process. There is no reason why we should have all of these entities, organizations out knocking on doors, passing these flyers out if we can distribute it at the point of lease signing. 2 sheets of paper does not seem like too big a burden. I think the motion is still on the table, correct? This seems like a very small ask. In terms of the legality, weren't those 2 cases dealing with very specific provisions, including criminal penalties without due process and warrantless searches?
Yeah. Primary issue of both of those was mandatory inspections and also criminal penalties.
So with the procedural safeguards
Mhm.
being omitted, though, was the real issue, correct? I mean, Akron, for example, has gone all the way to the Supreme Court with their mandatory, I mean, they're condemning properties over there.
Mhm.
That's been challenged multiple times since 1993 and has withstood
But
challenge.
But that deals with a nuisance ordinance, which we happen to have one almost identical. And we do enforce nuisances, but that's, I don't think that's the target of something like this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff, for reminding us not all renters are students. In fact, they're some of our poorest citizens in many cases. I'm not sure where I come down on distributing this information. I think if that can be done or just added to the checklist, I'm certainly okay with that. But I need to say that there seems to be kind of an assumption that a checklist will invariably accurately and honestly. And don't mean to be the cynic in the room, but that is not going to be the case. We received an email from a student that when he moved into his place, he wrote down about 75 things that concerned him. His name was Jarrett. What of that 75 items would have made it onto a checklist? I mean, what can we really imagine would have made it onto a checklist? Maybe 6, but not 75 items. So, I guess I don't want to go a whole lot further just with that seeming conclusion. But sorry, Mr. President, if I'm editorial, but I think that's naive and defies human nature to expect universally accurate checklists. And so, so we're getting at how do we educate people, but the way we really know what exists is to have a certain amount of true inspections. Checklists are just not going to do that. It could be the best checklist on the planet. It's
Well, the
just
motion
not going to
on-
happen.
The motion on the table at the moment has to do with two provisions, as I understand. One is to post some sort of document in the common area of an apartment that verifies that it's habitable somehow, and insisting that an information sheet be passed out at the time of lease signing. Is that what's on the table?
Yeah, and I can reread them if you like, but that's a fine summation.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, then, Mr. President, I call the question.
Was it second?
Okay.
Yes, it
Yes.
was.
Mhm.
All right. So,
You did, I believe.
I thought so.
Kay, could you call the roll, please?
Robinette,
No.
Roland,
Yes.
Zanfordino,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
No.
Hollenbaugh,
No.
Phipps.
Yes.
Okay. That's 4-3. For the new section 121.08. Okay. Are we now done with number 1? My pages are messed up. Okay. All right, 121.04, section 1. And the reason I bring up dates here is because there are dates in here that I don't believe are going to be attainable dates. For example, the planning department is working on registrations right now, and although they anticipate that everyone will meet the deadline of registering by December 31st, they're running into quite a few problems at verifying the information in the registration. It's very time consuming, and so they don't think that the actual registration database is going to be completed until, like this time next year, which is in 2022. So my motion with regard to the dates is that we just change the dates from 2022 to 2023 to give them time to implement things.
Second.
Okay. Okay.
Roland,
Yes.
Zanfordino,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
Yes.
Hollenbaugh,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette.
Okay.
Oh, he's not here.
Is there anything else specific to 121.04 that we have not discussed that needs to be discussed?
Mr. President,
Yes.
the Community Improvement Committee report also unanimously recommended that inspection reports be provided to tenants when there's a change of tenant. And that is not in here to my knowledge, and I think it could probably go in .041. There's probably somewhere else to stick it, but that's something that I just noticed going through the report today that didn't make the ordinance yet. So then you need a motion. It could be an addition to each of these two last paragraphs in .041 that says, and provided to any new tenant. Or Mike Marsh can help with that. Sorry, Mike. But I think that's a good idea. I think that and that was the committee's intent. Did I miss
Right
something?
after we were gonna get occupant shall attest only to receipt of the checklist and not to its accuracy, and then add another sentence right after that, I'm not sure how to say it standing here, but the checklists will be provided to new tenants. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the language that the committee, yeah, I mean, that just, when there's a change of tenant, the committee unanimously recommended that new tenants be provided
So
the current checklist.
Copy of
As opposed to a checklist
current. so
improvement
copy
or a
of-
correction.
Copies of current checklist.
Well, perhaps y'all meant, let's look at the actual language, I'm sorry. Yeah, 6D. So it was checklists, updated checklist should be done whenever there's a change in tenant.
Well,
So
the reason we went with annual is because according to the planning office, as Mark just mentioned, they're already finding this to be a gigantic undertaking. And to do it once a year for each dwelling unit and to have it in that window that they want to do it, which I don't remember the months, that came from housing. That didn't come from property owners, that was their request. So I don't know if you're going to require that every time there's a tenant change, then all of a sudden this is going to be an all year round activity. And I don't want to speak for them, and nobody's here from, I don't think, from housing, but I know that the idea of keeping this from a June to October exercise was their idea, because it happens to be the downtime for them, because even though every tenant's not a student, a lot of them are, and they're gone. And so that enables inspections. The people downstairs have more time. So it seems like if we did it once a year, whether there's a new tenant or not, it seems like that ought to be plenty. I don't know. And remember, we always have the right to pursue inspections on our own around here if we think there's something going on. So.
I don't know if the committee wants to speak to that, but really when I wrote this note down, my intention was just to make sure that the committee's desire that checklists were provided also to prospective tenants was captured in the ordinance. But I don't know if anyone from the committee wants to speak.
So
to exactly.
not doing a new inspection,
No,
but
though
to provide a copy of the
Yeah.
lacrosse.
So I think that the committee did perhaps intend that. I'm sorry for the confusion, but in my mind, I was just trying to make clear that we would also provide the checklist to prospective
So
tenants.
if we said copies of current checklists shall be provided by owners to tenants upon move-in, is that what you had in mind?
That would certainly work for me. I hear what you're saying, Mike, about generating these things every time somebody moves in. So I think if somebody moves in and they see the checklist in advance of renting, that was always my hope and intention, more than it
And
being
so
redone.
even if there's not, I guess what I'm getting at, Rachel, is even if there's not a new inspection when there's a new tenant, at least there would be a requirement to hand them the current checklist. See what I mean?
Yeah, make that clear. Yeah.
Right.
Was that
Okay.
second?
I, sure.
It has
I
not
would
been
second that.
seconded. Okay.
And it's Mike's wording.
Okay.
But that's instead of 1, I thought 2A.
Yeah.
That's where I put that. Okay.
Chairman Caldwell.
Sure.
Zanfordino,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
Yes.
Hollenbaugh,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Roland.
Yes.
Mr. President, since we're talking about dates, I did want to bring something up, and that is, it's particularly busy time in the summer for those that have rental units because of the prospective changeover in tenants, and that window, that never big enough window to go in and make repairs and go through cleaning, et cetera. And we are asking for the owners to do some administrative tasks at a very busy time of year. And I know the intent was, well, okay, there's not tenants there, but it does take a lot of time. You have to hire people to do the cleaning and the painting, et cetera. So that's all to say that perhaps the window of June 1st to October 1st may not be a big enough window.
Nobody's here from housing. I'll just speak up. That date came about as a result of a meeting with the, is it called the Property Owners Association? I'm sorry, I don't know what it's called.
Landlord
And
Association,
housing.
yeah.
In other words, that was actually a mutually agreed upon window between property owners and the housing office. Just thought you should know that.
Okay, so you're saying that they were okay with
Yeah.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that not a motion then?
No motion.
Okay. Anything else from 121.04?
Just a question, Mr. President. In 12104, there is reference to, should an issue not be resolved in a timely manner, or, a checklist issue that's not addressed, that that this should be brought to the attention of the zoning inspector. I'm not sure, and maybe I'm just ignorant of that position, but is that what we meant to say there, zoning inspector, or would that be the code enforcement officer? This is at the bottom of this is in section, 12104 2A. It
Down near
says
the
that
bottom of the page.
unresolved violations shall be reported to the zoning inspector.
That is a defined term in the definitions section.
Yeah, and that's actually putting a burden on the city folks to do that. That's not putting a burden on the tenant. That means if the planning director, who's the one administering this, learns of violations, that it's to be reported to the zoning inspector, who happens to work for her, but
Oh, so that would be
that's what that's
who
for.
I call the code enforcement
Right,
officer.
yeah, yes, yeah. Should I didn't even think about that. Is that the wrong term? I don't remember the organization chart. Yeah, I know that.
I mean,
I'm talking about the guys, the actual person's title that's in the job. Right.
Right. Right. So it really doesn't matter who the
Okay.
person is. That's
Right.
just the title.
All right.
Okay.
Except I would point out that in other places, we've changed zoning inspector to planning director. For example, in 0.05A1, that was changed. Rossford had zoning inspector, and then we changed it to planning director. And so I was just not clear.
That's because she's the department head and she'll be the one that determines if somebody's in compliance or not.
So we do need to use both those terms.
I
They're not
think- I think
interchangeable.
It wasn't, well, no, I didn't mean them to be interchangeable.
Okay. Okay.
whoever you want can make that decision. When I wrote it, I just thought it ought to be the department head, that's all.
Okay.
So I think what you're saying, Rachel, is if we changed it from zoning inspector to planning director and it already says or designee, or we say planning director or designee, then that gives the planning director just whoever they want, themselves or somebody else. And then that covers it. It's less restrictive.
But that definition that you're speaking of is the zoning inspector definition that talks in terms of designee. And then
Yeah,
in,
so
in
we've-
a handful of places, we have changed zoning director to planning director. And I'll look more closely at it. I mean, Mike, I'm sure. But it was just a question I had.
051 or 05A1 is pretty critical. If we're going to tell somebody they
Uh-huh.
don't qualify for self-inspection anymore, I think it ought to be the department head.
Mhm.
That's why I did
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Because that's probably a big deal if it happens.
Mhm.
Okay. So anything else in 121.04? Okay. With regard to the rental checklist, we started with a very small document and ended with a very detailed document. I guess I would like to make a motion that, number one, we not include the actual rental checklist form in the ordinance for the purpose that it can't be changed in the ordinance without revisiting the ordinance. So I don't think that the checklist, we refer to the checklist, but I don't think the checklist in and of itself should be in the ordinance because it's going to need to change
Mhm.
over time. Already with the registration process, we're seeing that there are things that are coming up that no one even imagined would be an issue that might happen. And I think that as we go through this process, with actually establishing this inspection process, that there are going to be things on the checklist that maybe aren't helpful or useful, and there are going to be things that they come across that they do need to know, or the things that do need to be checked out that it was not, thought of ahead of time. So my motion would be that we not include the checklist in this, and we give them the checklist from the Community Improvement Committee, and that we allow them to do their job with an administrative document and create a document that serves the purpose that it's intended to do. That's my motion.
I second and would like to have a point of clarification, and that is, let's say this passes and it goes to the administration. I have no doubt that they will use what the committee came up with as a starting point. Is there any need to have the document that they come up with reviewed and perhaps periodically reviewed, or any changes made to be bounced off of the Community Improvement Committee just to make sure we're all in sync? I don't know as if that actually has to be a requirement of the motion, but more of an understanding. The administration and council works very good together. So
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that it can be reviewed at any time.
okay,
So, which is another good reason not to have it in the ordinance.
Right.
So, okay.
Dennis,
No.
Harold,
yes.
Hollenbach,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Roland,
Yes.
Zanfordino.
I'm sorry, Kay, I lost the thread. We're voting on,
Not to include the checklist, the actual checklist in the ordinance.
no.
All right. So is there any other discussion on the checklist? Okay.
Sounds like it's moot at this.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to go through it.
Well, they're going to redo it.
Possibly.
This might be a good time to say that, you know, a lot of these things are going to be fluid. This is a huge undertaking we're doing right now, and we can't possibly expect ourselves to be perfect on it. This is only the first step, and there's going to be things we take out, and there's going to be things we need to put in. And I think this checklist is just a really good example of something. I think that will be very fluid. That will be subject to change constantly, because we want to do the best job we can do. We want to be fair to everyone, and that's going to require some changes. And the ordinance itself too. You know, we're not going to cover everything we wish we could cover and take care of a problem in one swooping effort. We're going to be changing this in years to come and adding more. It all depends on how things turn out with step one.
Okay. Well, this brings us to the meat and potatoes. Item 4, discussion of sections 121, 05, 06, and 07 with regard to what inspections look like. And does anyone have any suggestions?
Well, you know, my opinion and suggestion has been, you know, stated many, many times. I have great concerns about self-certification. That's basically what we have right now. And we have we have an unknown but failing rental properties, unknown number. But we have issues. And we basically have self-certification right now. And what'll change is they'll be submitting a piece of paper with great or accuracy or minimal accuracy. It's hard to say. So, you know, my feeling about these sections is the only way we'll ever really have a feel for what's truly out there is not self-certification. It's some kind of random third party oversight. You know, the committee's assignment was to not create a bureaucracy, not include a registration fee, which would have created the bureaucracy and perhaps some inspectors, but we stayed away from that because that was our charge. So the only thing that I felt that left me to think about in terms of truly addressing the housing in Bowling Green was to go with that no bureaucracy, no staff, and then implore that we do some third-party inspections. You know, there are folks who own 1,000 units in Bowling Green, maybe 2, and a registration fee for them would add up. But if they were inspected, you know, truly inspected by a third-party inspection, that'll also add up. But the more you own, the more things add up. I recently had an apartment. I no longer have that. If I had 100 and this was in effect, I would have different expectations of not only income, but financial expectations upon me. So, you know, my editorial comment on the body of this is that without adding some third-party inspections at property owners' expense, we'll be accomplishing virtually nothing.
Mr. President.
Okay. If I could just address one, John, you said something that I have to disagree with, just one issue, and that's that self-certification is what we have now. And self-certification is not what we have now. What we have now is absolutely nothing. And so, you know, I've gotten a lot of emails from people about that issue. That's like, well, if we don't do things a certain way, then it's just the same as it is now. But if you look at all the stuff that's in here, we're holding people legally accountable. You know, they can lie on a form if they want to, but eventually they're going to get caught lying on that form, and then life is not so good anymore. Whereas right now there is no form, and so they're not held accountable. So I just wanted to point out that it's not the same thing.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a good distinction. And when I read this and I see that, fabrication, which, again, in my, horrifically cynical mind might happen, it might have a consequence when uncovered, is the change, really.
Right.
But other than that, people basically inspect their things to this degree, to whatever degree they do now. What's different is they will be submitting a checklist with varying degrees of accuracy. And then again, if they are proven to be fabricating their situation, there's fines and consequences. But I think there'll be a lot more fabrication than consequences.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to point out that self-certification is not what's happening right now.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I agree. Self-certification is not what we have now. I guess I would argue that self-certification is worse than what we have now. What we have carved out here is a way to, we're going to have all the burden without any of the benefits. This checklist is, this is going to be a process for every property owner to go through. The city's not getting any revenue from this, so we're taking on a ton of extra work. Heather, the planning department, a team of 2 people. So we talk about not creating additional bureaucracy. We have just heard that she's now 6 months behind on the registration component. There's a ton of bureaucracy. We just haven't figured out how to pay for it or make it effective. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I mean, eventually we're going to have to, instead of just expounding on things, we're going to have like motions on things. So
One more thing, if I could. In the 59 Ohio communities, 60 communities in this region that have been identified throughout this process as regulating rentals, there are 5 that do self-inspection. Of those 5, only 1 does not charge anything to administer the program. The city of Cleveland charges $1 for the paper that it's printed on. So we are truly unique in how lax and ineffective this ordinance is going to be.
Mr. President, I had to step out again, and I want to add parenthetically that it is my birthday today, and I just turned 67, which might explain why I had to step out again. What topic did I miss in a couple of minutes?
oh, we've moved on to the meat and potatoes, number 4.
Yeah.
Oh, and we were talking about self-certification only versus self-certification in audits? Or
Mostly we've been listing our opinions on things.
Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, well, when we get to the point where we're talking about trust but verify and having an audit component, let me know. It seems like we're inching that way because, well, I'll just say it now. And that is, I feel we do need an audit component. We have, but however, I would dearly love to hear from Mike Marsh.
That was, I didn't have to leave yet, but I too am 67. I just wanted to point out that there are 2 sections before you that authorize such a thing. And while I don't share John's skepticism that our property owners are all going to lie, we do want to have the ability to verify if we can. And so that's the purpose. And I know you're not on 04, but that's the purpose of 042C. And I know you're not on 08, but that is the purpose of 08D. Those provide the zoning office with the ability to require inspections One in the event of probable cause, and the other one could be used randomly. But it's going to require cooperation of property owners in that case. The only way I know of to mandate inspection when a property owner doesn't want to cooperate is with a search warrant based on the decisional law that's out there, and that's probably fine. You know, we have a court judge, and we can do that, and we have before. We just did one last week, so under
But-
our current stuff. So
Can you get a search warrant without a probable cause?
no, I don't think you can.
So,
So we have to have either a complaint or maybe it's just visual, especially with the exterior stuff. Our zoning person can observe something, take a picture or something like that. But an individual could bring us a picture of an interior spot if they wanted to
right.
lodge a complaint, that kind of thing.
If there,
So yeah, you're right though, Mark. You just don't get a search warrant because you apply for one.
Right.
We'd have to have probable cause. Yeah.
thank you, Mike.
Okay.
In terms of the discussion that and the decision actually that the Community Improvement Committee had was that there was going to be a provision for an audit. We did have a considerable amount of discussion about a combination of a random sample and targeted inspection. And I sent out an email the other night to get into some of the details on that. I think that even given the possibility that if we did have a luck of the draw, someone's unit is selected for a random third-party independent inspection from a list approved by the city, that they sounds like they could just say no, thank you, and that's that. We can't really use probable cause as your number came up, but it's still, I think, worthwhile to do that, and certainly that's with the random. And there's two reasons for that. One is the same reason that there's tax audits, and that is to make sure that there's to get a handle on the degree of proper compliance, and then also the second is a motivation to not be caught, if you will. I don't think that they're equally weighted. The second component is the targeted, and that is we undoubtedly will get complaints throughout time and can investigate them. And through the provision of an audit that would be in this legislation, have the mechanism to contact the landlord and say, hey, listen, we have, and work on the wording, but need for you to have an independent third-party inspection by someone from the approved list with the city. So I think it's an important component. It is not an onerous step. From the get-go, the Community Improvement Committee has been of the opinion that we go incrementally. We go from the standpoint of a multi-phase, multifaceted. We haven't talked about the other facets, but multi-phase that we've tried this. And as was mentioned earlier, if what limited steps we take, significant but not draconian steps we take, if that doesn't work, then we have to revisit it and take another step. So the step of simply having self-inspections, although it is a significant step forward, I think that coupled with some sort of an audit provision would increase the impact of this legislation.
Well, that's why in May, that's why I submitted to you 08D.
Mhm.
It was meant to respond to that desire of the committee. And I would argue it provides for exactly what you just described. There's no number there that to me ought to be determined annually by the administration if they need to do 1 or 1,000 of them.
Right.
But that's the purpose of 08D, just exactly what you described. But yeah, that was written after, I think it was your last meeting when that came up at the park. And so the May 25 version of this, which is what you're all working from,
Right.
has 08D, and that's meant to address your desire in that respect.
So what you're saying is that as in its current form, we have the ability
Yeah.
to do audits.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Okay. So does anyone have a motion on anything?
Well, having the ability to do audits is not quite the same as requiring the audit. Are we all okay with that?
The distinction you're making, Jeff, is that we will have the structure in place for audits, but another step to take would be to say, all right, that structure's in place, but we would either have in legislation or a directive to the administration that this actually be done, and perhaps some guidance as to what the mechanism would actually be. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
So there's going to be no threshold that we are asking the administration to meet as in terms of the number of rental units that are audited, dwelling units.
Currently,
I mean, unless someone makes a
I think the
motion.
administration wants to be able to determine that based on perceived compliance or non-compliance. I think I'm right on that they didn't want to do it based on a raw number or a percentage or something. That might be too few or too many. The purpose of the audits is to try and get compliance, and we want to do whatever, I think I'm saying this accurately, we want to do whatever number is required to make sure owners are in compliance. But I don't know that we can put a number on that and say this is how many it takes. We have an income tax ordinance that authorizes us to audit, and some years we don't do any. And some years we do a bunch. It's the enforcement. It would be hard to write enforcement into this, I think, especially given that, as Mark mentioned, we're learning a lot already from the registration. Part of the reason the mayor wanted to segregate the two issues and have more time than we've had between them is we did think we were probably going to learn from registration. We already are, and it's just started. And some of that is going to inform us in how we enforce this. But I don't know if a raw number does anybody any good. I'd hate to be conducting inspections because we got to do a certain number and not do something else. I don't know. I'm trying not to speak for housing here because they're not here, but we don't want to do a useless thing either. But we want compliance, just like everybody does, and I think it's fair to say we'll do everything we need to do to make sure there is compliance.
So this is also ambiguous over whether the city is going to be doing the inspections or whether we are going to require third-party
I
inspection.
think we want to leave that up to the zoning inspector because it might be something that exceeds his expertise. Your list is 4 pages long. There's a lot of stuff there that I don't know anything about. And there's probably stuff there that he doesn't know anything about. He's not an electrician, for example. And what if the specific reason we got a search warrant because somebody wouldn't comply had to do with unsafe electric? He could walk in there like me and not know whether he was looking at safe electric or not. See what I mean?
Mhm.
So and that's why I tried to leave it up to him to decide whether he would require it.
I
If
think
it's
we've
because there's no screens on the windows, he can do that. But You see what I mean? There's a lot of stuff in your 4 pages, and I don't know if there is a person who knows about all that, to be honest with you. But we don't have them.
Hopefully someday we will be able to
Yeah,
get someone who can
yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And Deb, I want to just say that, I'm going to go back again and say, this is far from perfect. I mean, it could take us years to pass a piece of legislation that is even going to be good. But look where we've come. For 40 years, people have wanted registration, just plain registration. It's been advertised and it's been talked about in the newspaper and quoted in the minutes of past city council meetings that they wanted registration.
And
It's
you
taken
and the
us 40
administration
years.
came up with a way that we're doing that I think has buy-in from the owner community.
We have to
I
have
don't think
buy-in.
That's a
Yeah.
bad thing.
We have to have buy-in. We have to have buy-in to be successful. So we have to start someplace, and this council, I believe, is ready to start someplace. Step 1, imperfect, but have an open mind that there's going to be changes one way or the other to make this thing work. We have no idea how things are really going to be until we get it started, and we need to get it started. And yes, there's a lot of things I don't like about this, but I know one thing,
You're
you
hurting
have to
my
cooperate.
feelings, Sandy.
You're not one of them, but I mean, we need cooperation to get it done. And the landlords have said, we don't want to be charged. Okay, we're going to give you an exam, or we're going to give you a trial period. You do a self-inspection. Let's see how it works.
And we'll never know how it works. That's my opinion.
And the landlords are
and,
not okay with it.
We are backing away from what 55 cities do. I don't get it. I just don't. We're taking the steps, Andy. When Jeff first came on council, he pointed out these issues have been talked for about 40 years in Bowling
That's
Green.
what I'm saying. They've been talked about
Right,
for 40
and we
years,
have
but we're moving now.
And we have registration 40 years later. That's absurdly glacial. And, I go back to when Charles Buki was here, the first guy who, the consultant came in, did the land use plan, not the cap plan, the previous plan. He basically described a declining town. And he said, you're on a slope that's going to get precipitous. And when does it become precipitous? 40 years from now, 3 years from now? It don't 40 years from now, I guarantee you, based on what Mr. Buki was saying. And Mr. Buki felt there was going to be 10 families that didn't want this to happen. And we continue to seem to do the 10 family thing, is, my candid feeling.
But we are doing something now. We haven't done anything in the past. We are doing something.
We're doing as little as we can.
Well, maybe that's what we have to do to take a
I
step.
disagree with that statement too.
I understand.
As little as we can would be to do nothing at all.
Mr. President, we do not need to reinvent the wheel here. Right? Just because we're designing a wheel doesn't mean we need to make it square because it's the first time that we've ever waded into this issue area. It's happening everywhere. Over the last 40 years, when we have refused to act, cities all over the state and all over the country have surpassed us and figured out how to do this. So now if we're going to get on board at this late date, we don't need to start from square one. We can just go right ahead and do it effectively in a way that is going to be cheap for ultimately the tenants and ensure safe housing in the process. Self-inspection is not going to do that. Third-party inspection is going to be the most expensive way to do that.
We've reached a fork in the road, and although the words of Yogi Berra really wouldn't help us here, you come to a fork in the road, take it. The idea that, all right, this is a significant step, as Sandy and Mark have said. If we add the audit provision, then we are amassing additional information, as I alluded to in the email. And it really boils down to the mechanism and the number of independent third-party audits. as I tried to point out yesterday with the email, again, targeting confidence intervals, we could do this at a random component of about, give or take, roughly of the order of 250. So if we started off when we pass this with a directive to the administration to randomly select from our 7,000 or however many registrations, randomly select 250. Some of those will be in, units that are targeted, if you will, for lack of a better term, those that we have some idea may not be in compliance. And then supplement the random sample with a few from the targeted. Then what we have is the ability to see how effective this is and a rough idea of the percentage of those that report self-inspection that isn't completely accurate. That informs us for being able to then, the following year, adjust that amount. And I think that if I'm reading Jeff correctly, having some directive to the administration, either in the legislation or just simply as a council directive, to say, when this gets all put together, we're looking for a random sample of 250 units to have this mechanism for an audit that gets us, it's a step further than what we've got right now, but it's not an incredibly large step further, and it might be worthwhile to do that. So as far as the fork in the road, specifying that there is a modest number that meets a certain statistical criterion and go from there. And that just might be the middle point from what everybody seems to be specifying or talking about.
Well, I mean, just from a government standpoint, I am concerned with the fact that, you know, if we do these audits, basically what we're doing is, without probable cause, asking someone to submit to and pay for an inspection that we don't know how much it will cost. Maybe it's $200, maybe it's $300. I find that problematic. I would much rather inspect units where we have a probable cause, because then we can get a warrant that says, well, and there are mechanisms for figuring out places where we have a probable cause. I mean, I understand the pessimists among us want to think that, oh, well, nobody's ever going to complain, and if they do, nothing will happen and all that. But, you know, there are mechanisms. We could send out surveys to residents who live in apartments and ask them to fill out a survey. If that survey comes back and it has things dinged on it, that's probable cause. If EMS or the police or the fire go to a call somewhere and, you know, they see something that's not right in a rental unit, that's probable cause. So, you know, when we talk about numbers, I don't know how many apartments there are, 6,000, 7,000. You know, if we're talking about a percentage, maybe we're talking 700 inspections a year for a 10%, or if we're talking about a number of 250. But the thing is, we don't know how many complaints there are going to be. And it's entirely possible that in the first year, we could get 500 complaints. If it's as bad as some people say, maybe 7,000 complaints. So, you know, I'm hesitant to try and micromanage the administration too much. You know, we give them a chore that we want accomplished. We give them a task, and then we let them accomplish that task. Now, we can review it from time to time and go, okay, well, how many inspections happened last year as a result of the new legislation? And if they go, well, we didn't have any, then we'll have to go, well, something's clearly not working because there's still problematic rental properties in town. Or, maybe they say, well, we did 537, and we go, okay, that seems like a fairly reasonable number. But if we set a specific percentage, or if we set a specific number, then we're locking them into that. And, let's say we set a number of 700, and there are only 300 complaints. Then we end up in a situation where we have 400 that we have to fill just because we set an arbitrary random number that we have to fill. And how do we do it without violating, citizens' civil rights?
Mr. President, first, it wouldn't be arbitrary. We're not going to use a random number generator to come up with a number. Second of all, there is another statistical concept under quality control called acceptance sampling. So it could be the type of thing where what you do with that is you random sample a certain number. If the threshold is not met, then you sample more. If it does turn out there's not that many, then you don't go to the second stage of the acceptance sampling. Think of it in terms of a factory that gets raw materials from a vendor. They get the raw materials, they sample it. It meets certain criteria, they don't extend the sampling. So there's certain ways to do it. Now, for me, our discussion is, I'm very pleased with the discussion because we're talking about the extent to which there would be an audit. And that's great because there needs to be an audit component. Settling on the number, maybe it would be something to say not at least 250 or something, and that might be enough to satisfy people. Maybe not, but the fact that we're talking about an audit, I think is important.
Did you have something?
I agree there ought to be an audit mechanism. I'm also really concerned about putting a number on it because the first person that we have to try and pursue, the defense is going to be they're trying to fill their number. Okay? I've tried really hard through this whole process to have us avoid what some that have suffered severely. I've told the mayor before, I don't know what we would do around here if we got an order like Oakwood got. It told us we had to pay a $6 million fine because we violated people's Fourth Amendment rights. So that's why when I hear from lawyers who, they have an opinion, well, you ought to be able to do that. That's all fine. And if I didn't have this job, I might even feel the same way. But I don't have the luxury of being able to not worry about whether or not some federal judge is going to slam us and make an example out of us because we're violating people's Fourth Amendment rights. I think you've heard the mayor enough to know that there's a commitment among the people in the administration to enforce this. And the mechanism is in place for audits. But if we start putting random numbers on it, and I was an econ major, I love all that statistical stuff. It's great. It's not in the Fourth Amendment. It doesn't say we get to randomly pick a few people and violate their Fourth Amendment rights just to make sure nobody's doing something nefarious out there that we didn't know about. It doesn't say that.
So if we say we would like you to do a third-party inspection and they decline, we have no mechanism to pursue it.
Unless we have probable cause.
Unless it's probable cause. So
Right.
if they do submit to that, then there
or
is.
people could willingly
Consent.
consent.
That's my point. And it does bias the sample, of course, but the end result is it's the only way we would be violating. This is a statement, a question, not a statement. The only way that we would be violating it is if we forced this, and with the random sample component of those that are not on the target list, for lack of a better term, I'm sure there's a better term, we wouldn't be violating the Fourth Amendment because they have, first of all, we're not going on the property. Second of all, they have the right to decline. And so is that...
If they know, if they understand that. The person that brought the one that scares me the most, which was the one in Oakwood, didn't know any better, but they learned later that maybe they didn't have to allow the inspection. It's in the Court of Appeals now.
Well,
Maybe it'll get overturned. I don't know. I mean, in the federal Court of Appeals, but it was a $6 million order against a town half our size.
Well, and the $6 million, though, was not a penalty. That was restitution for fees that they had collected erroneously.
Which is why you're seeing a proposal that doesn't collect fees. Exactly right.
I mean, if our desire is to get an accurate representation of what's going on out there, a system where you ask people to be audited, the ones that are going to submit to the audit are either going to be ones that don't understand, they can say no, or it's going to be people that have really awesome properties and they're like, oh, I don't care if someone comes in and looks at my stuff. I got my ducks in a row. And they're willing to pay whatever the cost is to have the audit done. So
Yeah, that's why I said
we're
biased.
not going to get
other thing
get
is-
an accurate
So
representation.
audits are going to be very ineffective then.
No, I don't think that's true. But the other thing is you don't want to create an incentive for employees around here to just do the easy ones because they got to get 250 of them. I mean, I like the idea better of letting the administration, first of all, see what's out there, which we're all talking in the abstract right now. We're going to know more probably this time next year. But to be able to, use the judgment and the information and conduct however many audits it takes to ensure compliance. I think there's a commitment to do that over here. That's, I sense that there is some concern that nobody's going to enforce this, but we wouldn't have spent all this time putting it together if that was our inclination. I don't think this mayor has that position at all. I think he thinks it's pretty important, just like you. He sat in your seat for a long time and he heard from the same people you've heard from.
Well, we do have another option. There's always that additional option, and that is to have the targeted audit provision, which is what you've been talking about, Mike, and then reassess later to see if we need to pursue.
We're going to have to
random-
reassess all this anyway. I mean, John might turn out to be right. We got a bunch of liars in town and, we don't get anything that's honest. And if that's the case, you're probably going to change a lot of this.
Well, again, the
but,
rationale for the random sample audit was to get
I
a
understand.
handle on it.
I understand. And if and that works too. We know statistically it works. We know that. But unfortunately, everybody's got their individual rights.
That's not unfortunate.
And no, it's not unfortunate. I mean, I shouldn't have said it that way. But it's not, I just don't think it's worth the risk of having your ordinance thrown out or be attacked. There's also attorney fees in those lawsuits, Jeff, as you know, which sometimes end up being worse than anything else. Not that lawyers shouldn't get money, but because I'm for that. But,
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, with all due respect, it's not abstract for all of us. I have rented in Bowling Green within the last 5 years. Maybe I'm the only one in the room that has done so. I have a lot of peers that rent in the city of Bowling Green. I don't think John meant to imply that all landlords are liars. Under the scheme we've got here, though, it's going to take us a really long time to find the very few that are. In terms of not setting an amount of audits, I mean, I don't think it is a stretch to say that members of the administration are not going to be able to do a significant amount of these inspections every year. I mean, we're just on summer vacation because we needed to slow down because everybody is really busy right now. That seems to be the rule and not the exception. So to say that we are going to pass this and suddenly we're going to find time to do, I don't know, 24 inspections a year even, it seems like a stretch. So it's not that I don't trust that we don't all want this to happen. Everybody's worked really hard on these materials. It is just more so the reality, the limitations of everybody working here. There's just not enough hours in the day.
Could be.
Well, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we
Yeah,
have to end up hiring staff. We might have to hire a new individual because as we get into this, we find out that it was more problematic than we had anticipated. I mean, there's so many unknowns.
Heather, I assume Heather would request a person then or something. I mean, I don't know.
There are a lot of unknowns. I guess that's why I've always favored establishing a baseline so that we can take the 90% of properties that are already compliant and let them self-certify in perpetuity and zero in on the 10% that we need to actually be talking about. It seems like we have found a way to make that take 15 or 20 years.
I disagree. I think if someone lives in a crappy apartment, it's going to come to our attention. And once it comes to our attention, we have the authority under this to get a warrant and do an inspection.
It has come to our attention. I got a phone call last week from somebody in tears because she's being evicted because it's come to our attention. And it's come to members of city council's attention in the past, and the reaction has been insufficient.
I just want to say, I don't expect everyone to be honest, and I apparently am, now labeled as someone that calls everyone liars.
Oh, I was just joking. John.
It's
I
come
know
up
you
a few
didn't mean
times,
to.
so I feel I need to defend myself. But I think it's naive to expect total honesty from a group of people. Maybe 94 out of 100 are, to be totally honest. But the thing we got from this young man, Jared, was not from an absentee landlord. It's from one of the 5 families that own almost all these apartments. And I don't think their checklist is going to reflect the 75 issues this man raised. And again, I guess I'm just cementing my my belief that people are mendacious. But it's going to happen. And if, and I'm a layman, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know about the probable cause aspect that, Mike is bringing up. But historically, we have not been aggressive enough on these properties relative to any college town. And again, we have issues. We have greatly failing, declining property values. So my hope is that if we conclude we can only investigate when there's issues, that we become more aggressive and proactive. Jeff's point that he hears from people, I hear from people. I hear from people I contact, the health department on, and it's not like they get satisfaction invariably. So I think if we're going to conclude that this can only be based on complaint, that we really need to seriously look at addressing those complaints in a new and better way.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
John, I don't think that's what Mike is saying. Mike has read the case law. He's concluded that we can't have criminal penalties. We need to seek an administrative warrant when we don't have consent. That's all baked into the current ordinance. So I don't think that what you just said is accurate. And I would just say that I support generally a modest number of, exactly for the reasons Bill just said. We need to verify. There's value in verifying, and there's also value in the possibility of a random inspection being out there when you're filling out your inspection form. I think Bill makes great points, and not having heard a number yet, but generally I would support a number being in the ordinance.
Just to clarify, criminal penalties have been struck down without a hearing procedure before the penalties are issued.
And I understand Bill's excellent point. That was a great email, Bill. Your emails, you got to read them 19 times, but I thought it was really a good, review of statistical stuff. Yeah. But, and I can imagine 250 inspections would give you great information about 7,000, units. I think that's true. Is there any room legally for what Bill is suggesting? That kind of.
Well, I don't think there is, but I don't think you should be concerned that there will be an action, because if we have probable cause, I think we can hire it done, because that kind of anticipates that there's going to be some sort of enforcement mechanism. So even though it's true, we're short-staffed downstairs, short-staffed everywhere here, honestly. believe it or not, when I started here, there were 60 some more employees in the city than there are now. Now I know I'm old, but I think 62 or something. So the place operates pretty skinny. And so 2 people down there, there's a lot of work. And Jeff is right that if it was just left to those 2 people, I don't know how they would do very many inspections in the course of a year on top of everything else they're doing. But if we have probable cause, we can hire it done professionally, and we can pursue the fees as part of what we pursue in terms of a remedy to solve whatever the problem is we're trying to pursue. See what I mean?
And the
I just
cost,
don't like the idea of putting a number on it because something tells me that's going to become the boogeyman of the ordinance, and it's going to get us in trouble. And I don't think it's worth it. I think the other stuff is way more important than that.
well, I mean, I think we're at the point where everyone knows how everyone feels. And so, I've said where my mind is on this. I prefer it when we have a probable cause, because then we can inspect through getting a warrant. We can pass the cost of that inspection on to the person that we're inspecting, which becomes an additional penalty that is going to discourage people from trying to rent lousy rental properties. So I agree that we should follow up. I agree that we should be more aggressive. Once we have a mechanism, we should go out and survey renters and find out where problems are and what problems are and all of that sort of stuff. And I feel that through the probable cause and the warrants that we will have plenty of inspections going on once this gets up and running. And hopefully each year after that first year, there'll be fewer and fewer because there'll be fewer and fewer complaints. So where I'm at right now, personally, is I would like to not set a number in the ordinance, and I would rather us see how this thing goes. We can review it. If we need to set up some sort of more structured audit number later on, we can do that. But I won't be voting for anything that contains a percentage or a number that is just some number we came up with. So that's where I'm at on it.
Mr. President?
Yep.
I'd just like to second what you said. I agree with what you said. Just entertain a motion or move on to the next item.
So is there anyone that wants to make a motion as to setting some sort of number or percentage or anything of that nature?
Mr. President, I don't have a motion at this time, but I think we could also just continue to think about this issue and kind of mull it over. I've heard from you all on this for the very first time this evening, and so I don't think we can leave this open as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not passing legislation
That's
tonight.
true. That's true. We got plenty of time.
This will still,
Yep.
receive 3 readings, and
Yep.
I'm sure spirited discussion before we vote on it. So,
Mm-hmm.
And just to piggyback on what Rachel said, we currently have it going into effect June 1st, 2023. So that does give us time to gain more information prior to that, and we may end up revisiting it in a year. We have that luxury. Again, it's important to note that we do have an audit provision in this, and now we're talking about the split between random and targeted and the number. And so those are the 2 outstanding issues, and we do have the luxury of time to further consider them.
okay. So that being said, if there's no other discussion to happen, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.
better way to spend my birthday.
I know, lucky you, Bill.
Oh, and we got to hightail it over to the park.
Yeah, I know.
Happy birthday.
Might not be any ice cream left.
No, I can't have ice cream.
This is my party shirt, and I got in the car. And Peach told me it was okay for a party, but she didn't really speak to whether it was